On January 27, 2026, world number 3 Coco Gauff walked off Rod Laver Arena after a brutal straight sets quarterfinal defeat, slipped behind a barrier into what she thought was a quiet concrete ramp, and repeatedly smashed her racket on the ground to vent, convinced no one was watching. Within hours, that moment, filmed by a tucked-away behind-the-scenes camera, was clipped, captioned, and pushed to millions of screens around the world, instantly turning a private meltdown into global content and igniting a fresh war over how far the Australian Open is willing to go in surveilling WTA players when the match is supposed to be over. According to multiple reports from Melbourne, the only genuinely camera-free space left to the women this year is the locker room, with corridors, player gym access points, and internal ramps all wired up to feed broadcast and social media packages. That choice collides head-on with years of WTA rhetoric about protecting player welfare and privacy away from the court. And the dissonance is exactly what has Swiatek, Gauff, and Jessica Pegula openly asking who this tournament is really serving. Coco Gauff is not just any frustrated 21-year-old losing her temper after a bad day at the office. She is the reigning French Open champion, a top 3 star, and one of the WTA's most marketable faces, carrying the weight of expectations every time she walks into a Grand Slam, like the Australian Open 2026. In this quarterfinal, she ran into an inspired Alina Svitolina, sprayed 20-plus unforced errors, and saw her title hopes collapse in under an hour, all under the full glare of Rod Laver Arena and the global broadcast. The whole point of leaving the court, as Gauff explained later, was to get out of that glare for a minute, to find a tucked-away corner where she could smash the racket without it becoming a spectacle. The fact that the Australian Open had a camera trained on that exact spot anyway is what turns a routine emotional release into a case study in how the modern tennis machine captures every breath a player takes. To understand why this hits such a nerve, you have to look at the broader ecosystem the WTA has built around its stars. Officially, the tour talks constantly about mental health, safe spaces, and the importance of downtime in an era when social media already strips athletes of most of their private lives. The Australian Open has tried to brand its behind-the-scenes coverage as access, as a way of bringing fans closer to the journey from locker room to court and back again. On paper, hallway cams and tunnel feeds are supposed to show rituals, lucky charms, nervous walks, and joking exchanges with team members. In practice, when every corridor, ramp, and gym entrance is covered, the effect is more like a permanent reality show than a high-performance workplace. That is the line players are saying the tournament crossed in 2026. The Gauff clip is the spark because she did everything a reasonable player could do to stay off camera. She removed herself from the court, turned away from the main walkways, stepped behind a low barrier, and chose a dead concrete ramp that looked like a service area, not a stage. Yet the footage that emerged shows her, still in that bright orange match dress, pounding the frame into the floor again and again, a release she openly admitted she did not want shared with the world. In the press room, she said she tried to go where she thought there was not a camera because she doesn't really like breaking rackets and didn't want that to be her story of the day. Instead, that 30-second outburst became the defining image of her Australian Open 2026. Overshadowing the actual tennis and instantly feeding a debate about consent and voyeurism. The Australian Open's camera strategy did not drop out of nowhere. Tournament organizers have leaned hard into behind-the-scenes content for years, installing fixed cameras in hallways, fitness rooms, and even the player arrival zones to capture walk-ins, locker room exits, and candid reactions in real time. What is different this year, according to players, is the sheer density of that coverage and the way the feeds are being used. It's no longer just long lens footage of a player tying their shoes before a match. Fans and media have been zooming in on text messages on phones, studying body language as someone limps back from a medical timeout, and clipping every eye roll or muttered comment. When the cameras are always on, any moment can be framed as drama, even if the athlete genuinely believes they are finally off stage. That's where Iga Swiatek's intervention changes the tone from isolated complaint to systemic indictment. After her own quarterfinal loss to Elena Rybakina, Swiatek didn't just say the cameras made her uncomfortable. She asked out loud whether they are tennis players or animals in a zoo, watched even, in her own words, when they poop, and then immediately admitted she knew it sounded like an exaggeration, but that the feeling of constant observation is real. Swiatek described a tournament where being off the match court doesn't mean being off camera, where every hallway walk and accreditation mishap can be turned into a meme. She contrasted Melbourne with other majors like Roland Garros and Wimbledon, where at least some backstage areas are deliberately kept off limits to cameras and fans, so players can actually decompress. In her view, the Australian Open 2026 has gone in the opposite direction, shrinking that safe zone down to essentially the shower and the toilet. The zoo metaphor has stuck because it crystallizes what players across the locker room are trying to say. The line between working athlete and consumable content has been erased. A zoo animal is put behind glass to be watched doing everything, from eating to sleeping to pacing their cage. Swiatek's point is that tennis players didn't sign up for that level of scrutiny in the bathroom corridors and neutral hallways of a sporting venue. They signed up to be judged on their forehands, their decisions under pressure, and their performance under the stadium lights. When the cameras capture a player forgetting their credential, getting lost, or slumping in tears 5 minutes after a season-defining loss, and those moments are pushed as viral clips, you aren't documenting sport anymore. You're producing a reality show where the participants never agreed to the script. Jessica Pegula's comments take the criticism a step further by exposing what many see as a double standard between how tournaments police player content and how they treat players as content. Pegula explained that the Australian Open has previously contacted her and asked her to delete social media posts on the grounds that the tournament owns the footage and she doesn't have the rights to share it. At the same time, she points out, the event feels free to film her walking through every hallway, lifting in the gym, or talking to her team, and broadcast or repurpose those images without any individual sign-off. In Pegula's words, that feels like a stark invasion of privacy, not because cameras exist at all, but because the balance of control is tilted entirely towards the rights holder and away from the individual whose body and emotions are on display. Pegula also revealed that this is not a new, fleeting complaint. She referenced earlier years when Madison Keys made reducing backstage camera saturation one of her top priorities on the Player Council, calling the setup absurd long before Gauff's rant meltdown brought it to mainstream attention. The fact that multiple seasons later, Pegula can stand in Melbourne and say the situation actually feels worse, despite small attempts like posting warning signs about cameras, suggests that the economic incentive to keep rolling outweighs any promises to scale back. For players like Pegula, the practical reality is simple. They are watched entering the venue, walking the tunnels, training, cooling down, and sometimes even stretching in what used to be quiet corners. The only truly private slices are when they step into the locker room, the shower, or the bathroom cubicle, and that's a shockingly narrow sanctuary in a place that doubles as their office. This is where the WTA's own regulations and messaging come under scrutiny. On paper, the tour's rules and mental health initiatives talk about safeguarding athlete well-being, reducing harassment, and giving players more control over their image. Yet in practice, at a Grand Slam run by Australia Tennis, WTA stars are discovering that their off-court movements are a monetizable asset they don't actually own. Gauff's ramp outburst becomes compelling footage. Swiatek's irritation about being stopped by security without her pass becomes a shareable clip. Pegula's everyday walk through a hallway becomes B-roll for shoulder programming. The question that hovers over all of this is whether the WTA is willing or even able to insist that partners like the Australian Open carve out genuine off-camera zones as part of doing business with her players. The stakes for the athletes go beyond embarrassment. Every clip like Gauff's smuggles in a narrative. Coco Gauff as petulant racket smasher rather than overachieving 21-year-old dealing with the mental strain of Grand Slam pressure. Those narratives can shape sponsor perceptions, fan attitudes, and even the way umpires and commentators talk about a player the next time something emotional happens on court. Meanwhile, the players themselves have almost no say in how the footage is edited, captioned, or contextualized. A 30-second sequence cut away from the surrounding 10 minutes can make an understandable outburst look like a tantrum. And once that version is out, it's nearly impossible for a player's more nuanced explanation in the press conference to catch up. From a governance perspective, there's an uncomfortable echo here of other controversies where WTA players have felt overexposed and underprotected. Ariana Sabalenka, for instance, has previously been filmed in cool-down areas smashing a racket after a Grand Slam final loss, footage that traveled the world in the same way Gauff's ramp moment did. In both cases, the cameras were placed in zones players reasonably thought were more private than the court itself, and in both cases, the emotional fallout became more of a story than the match. When Swiatek and Pegula say this is starting to feel like a pattern, they're not just reacting to one viral video. They are mapping a trend line of increasing surveillance meeting a governance structure that has not caught up. The Australian Open could argue that players are notified about cameras and that modern fans demand this kind of access. Signs have reportedly been posted to remind athletes they are on camera in certain areas, and the tournament's digital channels are full of softly lit, humanizing backstage clips that many players might actually enjoy when the footage is flattering or neutral. The problem, as the Gauff saga shows, is that the same infrastructure that produces charming content also produces what Swiatek calls zoo moments, where an athlete at rock bottom or in the bathroom corridor becomes fair game. The warning sign on the wall does not solve the underlying power imbalance between an individual trying to find 30 seconds of solitude and a tournament that has already hardwired their campus like a television set. In the days since Gauff's smash went viral, calls for change have focused on two concrete ideas. The first is the creation of clearly identified camera-free routes in zones, not just the locker room itself, where a player can walk, sit, or decompress without worrying about a lens. The second is a serious conversation about consent and usage rights, where tournaments that want to film players everywhere must at least give them some say over how the most intimate or explosive clips are packaged and shared. Swiatek's rhetorical question about whether it is even worth talking to organizers hints at how pessimistic some players are about getting real reform. But Pegula's hope that this controversy will finally restart the debate shows there is still a belief that collective pressure can move the needle. For now, the 2026 Australian Open will be remembered, at least in part, for these hallway cameras as much as for the tennis itself. Coco Gauff wanted 15 seconds of privacy to let her frustration out of her system. Instead, that frustration has become proof that at Melbourne Park this year, the show never stops rolling, even when the credits should already be running. Until the WTA, Tennis Australia, and the Grand Slam board draw a firmer line between performance and surveillance, players will keep asking whether they are competitors or content, human beings or zoo exhibits in a reality TV hell of someone else's making.